Good morning, everyone. Oh, good afternoon. I've said good morning. That's now the third time that I've said good morning in the past half an hour. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us and giving up your lunch times to spend with us. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us. Today's session is building psychological safety at work, and we're here to explore what it really means for people to feel safe to speak up, share ideas, admit mistakes, and ask for help without fear or blame of judgment. That kind of trust is the foundation of collaboration, innovation, and well-being. I'm Lauren Kelly. I'm the insurance specialist here at CSC, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Stephanie Thompson. Steph has been an advisor and thought leader in the workplace mental health sector for over 10 years, previously working at the Black Dog Institute, where she led and supported workplaces in creating mentally healthy work environments. She has experience in strategically designing, implementing, and evaluating workplace wellbeing initiatives, as well as in service delivery in the mental health sector. Steph holds a Bachelor of Social Work and Masters in Human Resource Management. Today, Steph will guide us through practical strategies leaders and teams can use to create a culture where every voice counts and every idea matters. We will learn what psychological safety looks like in everyday situations, why it matters for our well-being and for teamwork, and how we can all help create a workplace where everyone feels heard. Before we begin, just some housekeeping. Please pop your questions into the chat at any time. We'll gather them. I'll try again. Put your questions into the chat function at any time, and we'll gather them for discussion towards the end. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming Stephanie Thompson. Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me. And hi, everybody. I'll just share my screen before we get started. Is that showing okay, Lauren? You can see my slides? Yep, beautiful.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me here. This is my fourth webinar that I've delivered through CSC. So it's been a really exciting year to share all these really interesting and different topics. And thank you for coming, especially this time of year. I know people might be sort of limping to the finish line, or, you know, might not just be this sort of front of mind in terms of learning and sort of absorbing new information. So I really appreciate and value your time that you've given to learning about this today, this really important topic. One of my favourite topics, all about building psychological safety. I also want to just begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we are all joining from. I am on Gadigal land. I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. I always love to see where people are joining from. If you want to pop the names of the lands that you're on today into the chat, just to get a bit of a picture of all the different places that we're joining from, that's always welcome too. And similarly, I'm always really curious about who is in the audience. So if you want to pop in, and you don't have to, of course, but if you want to pop in your role or the name of your organisation, again, just so I understand who I'm talking to in this webinar. Lots of blank screens, which is fine, but always nice to just get a bit of a sense of who's with us today. So before what we're going to be running through today, I'll tell you a little bit about SuperFriend. I think we have some repeat attendees, so I'm sure you've heard it all before, but I'll give you a quick overview of what SuperFriend do. And then we'll just dive into what do we mean by psychological safety, what is it, how do we cultivate it, and particularly what does it mean in the workplace environment to have that psychological safety. So SuperFriend, a little bit about us. We are a fairly small not-for-profit organisation that exists purely to focus on workplace mental health. We've been around for around 15 years, and at our core is research and data collection. So for over 10 years now, we've been collecting data each year to develop our Indicators of a Thriving Workplace report, which we release annually. We gather data from Australia's workers, from workers in Australia across the country, and we now collect that data seasonally. So what that means is that we have real-time data on how people are doing across psychosocial hazards, as well as our 5-domain framework. So through our data collection over the last 11 or so years, we have, as I mentioned, a huge amount of insights. And through those insights, we've created our 5-domain framework, because we know that when you look after these 5 domains, you will build a thriving workplace. And those 5 domains are connectedness, leadership, work design, capability, and safety. And again, we also gather data on the psychosocial hazards as well. Importantly, we're big on not just having data for the sake of it, but turning this data into action. We do this through many ways. We collaborate and partner with people in the sector, using our insights to be able to predict and get on the front foot and prevent poor mental health from occurring in the workplace. And we develop resources and tools, including things like this webinar, to try and support people to improve mental health in the workplace and make sure that the workplace is somewhere that not only doesn't cause harm, but is actually a tool to keep people well, which is really important. Good work can be good for people. So today we're talking about this really interesting subject called psychological safety. What is it? What is psychological safety? So psych safety is a shared belief that the environment we are in is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So that means that people are free to ask questions, raise concerns, offer ideas, or even admit mistakes without that fear of either being embarrassed or punished or sort of eye-rolled at. It's not necessarily a workplace culture where everything's really nice and everything's really perfect and everything's fine. Sometimes these workplace cultures with strong psychological safety can feel quite tense or have levels of friction, but it's about having constructive candor. It's about honesty, authenticity, respect, and clarity. So, when people don't feel psychologically safe, they self-silence, they avoid taking risks, and people tend to stay quiet, even when they might notice that there's a big red flag occurring, or that there might be some major consequence that other people haven't noticed. And this silence, this culture of silence, is incredibly detrimental to well-being and also workplace performance. I'll spend a quick moment just on some definitions, because I know there can be sometimes a bit of confusion around the difference between psychosocial safety, psychological safety, psychological health and safety, etc., etc. So just a quick note on all of that. So psychosocial safety is really the 14 different hazards that have been identified through the Code of Practice, through Safe Work Australia and Comcare, that exist and as part of psychosocial health and safety, workplace health and safety. That's a very specific health and safety risk-based framework that is really around work health and safety professionals, keeping an eye on these different factors like workload, like role clarity, like job demands, like bullying and harassment, etc., and making sure that controls are put in place to minimise the impact of these hazards. Now, that's what psychosocial safety is. Psychological health and safety is a bit related to that. We're talking about the kind of nuts and bolts of work health and safety legislation when we're trying to not cause harm and avoid risks that will cause harm. That's when there's the health and safety kind of language at the end, that's where we're talking about legislation. Psychological safety is quite a different concept. This isn't something that's necessarily in legislation at this point. It's really about that interpersonal dynamic. Is the workplace an environment where people feel like they can be themselves, they can be open, they're not going to get in trouble when they admit a mistake, that there isn't that culture of silence. And psychological safety isn't just a workplace thing. We also have psychological safety, or don't, in our sort of social relationships or our family dynamics as well. And again, in a workplace, you might have strong psychological safety with some people in the work environment, but maybe not in another environment. So you might have strong psychological safety with your manager, but not, say, in a project team that you're working on. So it's really something that is co-created by more than one person, and it's that sense of trust and support and positive assumptions that really happens between two or more people as well. So I know that was a lot of information, and it can sometimes take a moment just to sort of clock that, but there is a difference between psychosocial safety and psychological safety for the purposes of this presentation. I think that will become clearer as we move through these slides. So why does psychological safety matter? So according to Super Friends Indicators of a Thriving Workplace data, we know that when workers feel safe to speak up, they are twice as likely to therefore speak openly about their mental health. So when there is a culture where psychological safety is strong, people are more likely to share how they're going in terms of their own mental health, meaning that they're more likely to access supports in a timely manner and really minimizing the impact of their mental distress, and interrupting it before it turns into a full-blown injury. Because when workers don't feel safe to speak up, the data shows that they are 3 times more likely to leave the organisation in the next 12 months. So this means that your strong workers, your high performance, who we know are at greater risk of burnout already, if they don't feel psychologically safe in their work environment, they might not speak up about how they're doing. You might lose them. Not only are you losing good workers, but the cost of then replacing that worker, finding good talent, onboarding those people and keeping those people is really significant. So, there's a really important business case to talk about psychological safety, as well as the mental health impacts and all of the productivity impacts as well when we talk about psychological safety. Research tells us that psychological safety is one of the strongest predictors of workplace performance. So it's not just a nice to have, it's really about that business success as well. So when people feel safe, they tend to share ideas that lead to innovation. They problem solve more effectively. They're not spending time in that amygdala brain, that fight or flight response. They're in that really creative mode where they can problem solve and think a bit more laterally. There's stronger collaboration. Typically, there's fewer mistakes made, or certainly, if there are mistakes being made, they get noticed, called out, and sort of rectified much quicker because people don't just sort of say nothing and just keep going. People speak up early when something isn't right. And this makes psychological safety not just that well-being concept, but a strategic advantage as well. It drives culture, engagement, and outcomes. So what does it look like in the workplace when it does exist, and what does it look like when it doesn't? So when psychological safety is low, people tend to withdraw. They might become more cautious, more guarded, and of course, more disengaged. So as a leader, you might see symptoms like, you might notice, oh, look, everything seems fine, but then there's sort of this low ownership or low risk taking in terms of showing initiative. So everyone's sort of getting along just fine, but then there's something going on in terms of new ideas and new initiative and not much accountability being taken. You might also notice that people aren't asking for help as much. So again, what you might think is a good thing that people are just getting on with it and they're not asking lots of questions, that is sometimes a bit of a red flag, or it might be depending on, your people and what else is going on. Because, it can be dangerous when people keep going on a path regardless of whether or not it is the best option or the best path, due to fear of being reprimanded for asking questions. We need to have disruptors, people who challenge and seek to understand, obviously all done with respect. If you're a leader and you don't have that in your workplace, I'd be curious about why not. Because we don't just want people saying yes blindly, we want people who are going to ask the right questions in the respectful way. Some other things you might notice if psychological safety is not strong is rumours increasing because transparent conversations aren't happening. So a bit more speculation, a bit more cynicism, a bit more gossip, those sorts of behaviours. Now, I don't think it's reasonable to expect no gossip to exist within a workplace. I think it's kind of the nature of human beings. We need to debrief, we need to talk with each other. But it's when it becomes that really negative cycle of just talking negatively and not having the open, authentic, courageous conversations that we really need to have and should be having. So the blame culture, so blame replacing that accountability. Instead of people feeling okay to reflect and acknowledge their role in something, there becomes a sort of deflecting, a bit of defensiveness, and this kind of blame culture. I wasn't included in the project meeting and that's why it didn't succeed, or, this kind of just pushing it out instead of going, hey, maybe I should have asked more questions, or maybe I could have played a role here in a different way. Because people just don't feel safe. They're not given that space to really reflect on their involvement, and it can be a bit of a problem. So poor decision making, as I said before, people don't trust themselves or they don't feel empowered to make calls that actually should sit in their remit. If a person is not empowered by their leader, if they don't feel like there is good psychological safety in the team, or whether it's with their leader or peer to peer, then they're not going to make those calls. They're not going to make decisions. They're not going to feel confident to show that initiative. So those decisions can sometimes lag or just not get made at all. And this environment really increases psychosocial hazards, which I mentioned earlier, particularly around workload stress, incivility, and role conflict. When people aren't asking the right questions, or, when there's that sort of lack of connection amongst team members, it can be a bit of a problem in terms of psychosocial risk as well. And over time, it becomes a big retention issue and a culture issue. You're not going to attract the right people if your workplace develops a reputation for not being a place where innovation, creativity, and psychological safety exists. So that's some of the negative stuff. And on the flip side, when there is psychological safety, these are some of the things that you might notice. People are asking questions without fear. Ideas are shared freely, no matter who it is. Of course, we need to show respect. This isn't to say that you can just say, I don't think this is a good idea, or, why are we doing this? We need to have a level of respect, but there is a sense of safety and openness that we can have these difficult, confronting conversations, and it's not going to cause a big rupture, and we're not going to get in trouble. So again, you see people admitting mistakes. You notice healthy debate in a meeting, especially in strategic or project-based meetings. That healthy debate about a topic or about a project or about a decision, as opposed to about the person, is really important as well. I can't stress enough that psychological safety, or having strong psychological safety, doesn't look like having a beautiful, fun culture in and of itself. It can look a bit like that. It doesn't mean there is no friction or occasionally even conflict, but it does mean that when these things occur, debate is done in that respectful way, that there is listening and curiosity, and alternative ideas are considered. When things might tip into conflict, that can be a bit more of a problem, but there is a commitment to try and repair and move forward, rather than being focused on, you did this and this is your fault, to blame and defensiveness. Like many workplace culture issues, psychological safety can take time to cultivate, but not a lot of time to damage, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to prioritise that culture, that psychological safety every day, until it becomes sort of BAU. Now, to help this be a bit more practical, we're going to walk through the 4 stages of psychological safety. So this is a framework developed by Dr. Timothy Clark, really trying to highlight that, you might have a little bit of psychological safety, but what we're all aiming for really is that challenger safety, which I'll talk about in a moment. So stage 1 is known as inclusion safety. So at this stage, people feel accepted for who they are. They feel like they can show up as themselves. So certainly if you have inclusion safety, that's fantastic. You're on the right path. You might have a different background. You might have, neurodivergence. You might have different experiences. It doesn't matter. Everybody is still welcome. And this matters because belonging is a fundamental human need. When people don't feel included, or they don't feel like, their point of difference is at least recognised and included, they spend their energy maybe masking or sort of self-censoring or monitoring and trying to fit in and conform, rather than, truly contributing and making a difference. In reality, this can look like, new team members are warmly welcomed and integrated. People feel comfortable saying hello, asking simple questions and joining in conversations, and without thinking, oh, this is very cliquey, or I might not be welcome in that conversation because I'm a bit different. Differences like cultural differences or, personal working styles are respected instead of judged. And when inclusion safety is missing, you see things like, as I mentioned, cliques or people holding back, or individuals who stay quiet because they don't want to be seen as being the disruptor. Well, what you want to do is really embrace the disruptor. The next stage along is learner safety. So that's the belief that it's safe to ask questions, maybe experiment, stretch a bit, and even get things wrong. You start to see this in startup environments where there's that fast pace and kind of constant evolution and sprint type culture as well. So if inclusion is really about belonging, then learner safety is about growth. So it looks like people feeling safe to say, I don't understand, or can you show me? So instead of people just nodding and going along with things, it's people saying in the team meeting, putting their hand up and saying, I'm sorry, I still don't quite grasp this. Can you go back to the beginning? Can you show me what you mean? Teams are actively sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it, instead of that kind of protective territorial nature. There's an openness and positive assumptions are being made. Mistakes are treated as information, not as personal failings. Mistakes are rarely one person's fault. Sure, sometimes they are, but usually it's an opportunity to learn. It's a data point. So treat all the mistakes in your culture, in your workplace, as something you can learn from, as a data point, instead of going, that mistake was made, that person's no good, or they shouldn't have done that, or even we shouldn't have done that. Everything is data, everything is learning. And when learner safety is missing, you might hear phrases like, oh, I should already know this, or this might be a silly question, or oh, never mind, I'll just look it up myself. Of course, some people might talk that way because we don't want to be a bother, but broadly speaking, there is that comfort in asking the questions, and there's a culture where that is accepted. And importantly, it's role modeled by leaders. That's how we give that permission. You'll see along the bottom axis there, we have permission, and up the top on the side, we have respect. Permission is given through evidence, it's given through role modeling, and it's built over time. So it's not something that can be done just once. It's something that we need to work on. Leaders and everybody really need to be working on this permission culture to make mistakes, to ask questions every day. So stage 3 is contributor safety. So that's the belief that it's safe to use your skills, offer ideas, and take meaningful action. At this point, people really want to make a difference. You've got some really fundamental psychological safety occurring, and people want to contribute real value. But they need clarity, they need trust, they need that sort of permission, as I was talking about, to be inbuilt. And it looks like people proactively, offering suggestions and solutions. So instead of waiting to be asked or waiting to be invited, people might come forward and say, hey, I noticed you were working on this and I have this idea. Are you open to that? And people saying yes, just because somebody might be in the marketing role, or somebody might be in the finance role, or somebody might be in a certain project role, doesn't mean there aren't other people with skills that could offer some insight or ideas or problem solving. And so there's that openness to contributing and allowing that contribution. So team members take ownership of tasks and deliver confidently, and everyone understands how their work contributes to the bigger picture. That's a really important one. I know it can get murky sometimes, especially in more larger, complex organisations, but keeping that purpose in mind is really helpful to build that psychological safety and people feel empowered and like a contributor. And when contributor safety is missing, you might see people, really doing the bare minimum or waiting for instructions and kind of, again, deflecting that responsibility. There might be a hesitation to step forward because they fear criticism or being shut down. So if someone has the experience of being shut down or being criticised, they're obviously less likely to do it again. When people get that evidence, they go, well, I tried that and it didn't work. So you really need to be building that sense of safety for contributors. I can't say that word for some reason today. Creating that empowered environment where people can be engaged and, who feel safe, free to, contribute their part. The final stage that we're all trying to get to is challenger safety. So the belief that it's safe to challenge the status quo, raise concerns and question decisions, even when it's uncomfortable. So this is where that innovation and real problem solving live. And it looks like people respectfully questioning processes or decisions or assumptions. I know I've said this a few times around respect, and I think it's really important if you're looking to if you do notice through this session today, hey, maybe my team or my workplace could do with a little bit of a boost in the psychological safety. Having a conversation about what respect means to you or to each other is actually really important, because it does look different for certain people. I think we all assume that, well, I think it's obvious. We learned about respect in primary school. We should also know what respect looks like. But I don't think we do as much anymore. And I think it's changed a bit in terms of even hybrid work. How do we conduct ourselves in Teams meetings or online meetings? Are we all saying good morning to each other before asking for that report that was due at midday? So having some kind of conversations around etiquette and about how we show up and give an offer and do things with respect might feel a bit trivial, but it's also a great way to kind of open the door to that conversation that then would lead on to psychological safety. If I go into the workplace, into my office, and my manager doesn't look up and doesn't say good morning to me, I start to feel like I've got to walk on eggshells. They're not in a good mood, but then if I say to them, oh, good morning, is everything okay? They're like, oh, yes, everything's fine, I'm sorry. So I think it's about that transparent sort of taking the risk, saying hello, and also acknowledging to each other, hey, when you don't say good morning to me, it makes me feel like something's wrong and maybe you're mad at me. Can we try and commit to saying good morning to each other? Again, that's a fairly trivial example, but these sorts of behaviours around respect are important to talk about really openly. And so with challenger safety, leaders listen without becoming defensive. If somebody in a leadership role, you have an all staff and there's somebody who asks a question, or a town hall, and somebody asks a question about a decision that was made at an exec level, execs aren't defensive. They listen and they acknowledge, hey, I understand why that might have been confusing for you. Here's why we made this decision. So listening, curiosity, positive assumptions, and dropping defenses is really how you build that psychological safety. And when challenger safety is missing, that's when you might see things like groupthink, avoidable mistakes, and, everyone knew but no one said anything, because there's this kind of like, we're not going to challenge the status quo. We don't want to be the disruptor. Again, doesn't mean that people are rude. It means creating a climate where respectful challenge is normal and invited. So these 4 stages form a powerful progression. We've got inclusion safety, which is I feel accepted, which moves into learner safety, which is I feel safe to grow, contributor safety, I feel safe to make a difference, and challenger safety, which is, I feel safe to speak up and improve things. And when teams move through these stages, that's when you'll see that higher trust, better collaboration, more innovation, all the good things that come from psychological safety. So I've talked a little bit today already about leaders and the role that they play. Psychological safety is everybody's responsibility. It's something that we all contribute to, but certainly leaders, like always, have a really pivotal role here. So they do this they can build that psychological safety through things like curiosity, like I mentioned already, asking questions, inviting input, making positive assumptions, and seeking to understand. When people start to talk, listen, hold the space for people to share, sit uncomfortably in the silence until people speak up. Humility, admitting when you don't know or when you've made a mistake and listening to the answers. That's a really admirable quality when it comes to authentic leadership, which I think is something that we understand now as being the gold class standard for leadership in most environments. And transparency, so explaining decisions and acknowledging uncertainty. Now, I don't expect, for example, all of my senior leaders to tell me every single thing, justify every decision to me or to everyone in the workplace. But when there are questions asked, acknowledging those. And if you don't have the answer, acknowledging that. I think people start to figure out whether leaders are being transparent or not. It's fairly obvious. So always work with the assumption that my people can handle this and I owe it to them to be as transparent as I possibly can be. Lead with the facts. And similarly, setting expectations. If there are times when people, can't ask questions because it's not appropriate, let them know that. Say, look, I'm going to share some information with you. I don't have any answers, so I'm not going to take any questions this time around, but I'm going to come back to you and we'll have that conversation next. So setting those expectations up early when you're maybe sharing, say, workplace change or restructure or a big announcement, really being clear about the communication that you're sharing. Consistency, again, these are some of the principles that we spoke about in the authentic leadership webinar we did last time. So people will trust leaders when they are consistent, when they go, that person has integrity and they talk the walk the talk, and they are consistent. That's a leader I respect and I feel safe here. And then inclusivity and inviting participation, as I mentioned earlier, ensuring all voices, including quieter voices, are heard. Small moments, consistently repeated, shape the team culture. So in terms of, what can leaders do, psychological safety is built over time through the quiet moments. It's built through the busy moments, through the stressful moments, and through role modelling, these behaviours in an ongoing manner. And what really erodes psychological safety is things like, when leaders are very reactive or have a really strong, maybe yelling or something really, really intense reaction to something. Of course, punishing people for raising issues, withholding information, or sort of sharing things with certain people in a not clear or fair manner. Micromanaging and gatekeeping can really erode psychological safety. Showing favoritism can be an issue as well. So people think, well, this isn't a fair and just work environment. Even subtle behaviors, like that sort of giving a certain team member more responsibility, or maybe even multitasking during conversations. Have you ever been in a meeting in real life meeting and someone's there on their laptop clearly not paying attention? It doesn't show respect. It doesn't make you feel valued as a person. So those kind of small behaviors, those micro behaviors that over time make you send that message of, this is not a safe space. This person is not thinking of me. They do not care about what I have to say. What message is your behavior sending over time? So what's in your toolbox as a leader? Team check-ins, prioritize, keep them sacred, create consistent moments to discuss workloads, blockers, and what support people need. Every team will be different with what works there. In my old life, in a different role, my manager, we had fortnightly one-on-ones that weren't even about my workload. It was about, how is Steph going? And that time, occasionally it would have to get cancelled or moved, but she always took the initiative to reschedule, never leaving it on me. And really that made me feel like this person values me and they prioritize me, and this manager, holds space for me. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how that played out in a moment as well. Providing clear expectations, uncertainty really creates anxiety. Clarity creates confidence. It's really quite simple at the end of the day. It's not always easy to give everybody the level of certainty that they might need or want. But again, open communication can help take care of that. A learning out loud culture. So when leaders really share their own personal lessons they've learned, maybe they share a mistake they've made or a time they've failed, maybe in a previous role, it's really about admitting and owning and talking about these moments of lessons learned. It gives permission for others to do the same. I'm not perfect, and I'm learning too. Debriefs, learning moments, rituals, moments like questions first, having in your town hall, okay, we're going to have a rapid fire ask me anything, or 2-minute reflection rounds really can help to reset team norms. Introducing a wellbeing check-in, just whip around the table at the beginning of a team meeting. Applying this sort of shared language that can really, again, over time, not as a one-off, that does not feel authentic. It feels very tokenistic, but introducing these concepts and these behaviours and these ideas and tasks in little ways that give teams that sort of shared language around psychological safety. So I've talked a lot about how psychological safety presents in a team setting. And I've also mentioned earlier, that within one workplace, even within one team, there might be psych safety between two people, but between another two, there might not be. So maybe between your peers, there's a really sense of strong psychological safety. You share, you collaborate, you thrive together. But with you and your leader, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like there's psychological safety. And as well as enabling, creativity and productivity, psychological safety has a profound impact on individuals when they find themselves needing support, if they're struggling and not doing so well. And so I wanted to just quickly bring that to life a little bit by sharing a little story about me, which I haven't actually shared for a couple of years. So this was back in June 2020. I was returning back to work from my last parental leave stint. I don't know if you remember June 2020. I think many of you are joining from Canberra, but for those who, all over the place, it was a really uncertain time. And I just had a year off work, and I was coming back to work during really right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Everyone was working from home. I remember I was in a really not a very good place. I had, anyway, I'll get to that in a moment. So on my first day back to work, I actually went up to my boss's house, and it became really clear that I was not going to be able to work at the capacity I had hoped because of my postnatal anxiety. I was not really sleeping. I also had a baby who didn't sleep very well, but even when I had the opportunity to sleep, I was not able to. I couldn't really talk without crying. I was not really able to eat. I was a ball of anxiety. I was really anxious about all of the COVID news that we were getting, all that uncertainty, just all the, visuals of Italy at the time. It hadn't fully hit in Australia, but it was very much coming. I was diagnosed fairly quickly with postnatal anxiety, an all too common experience for many parents. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because when I shared this story a few years ago, I always talk about how I didn't have a choice but to tell my manager that I was so unwell that it was obvious. Blind Freddie could see how much I was struggling, that I had to be transparent because I had no choice, and it was fairly obvious anyway. But what I know now is that there were many choices for me, and fortunately for me, it didn't feel like a choice. It was a sort of a non-decision. It was not a difficult choice to make. What I did do was that night I went home and I ended up calling my manager again, and I said, look, I'm not okay. I don't know what I need. I'm not sure what is going to happen next, but I cannot come to work every day 9 to 5 and do the thing that I was doing before. And so, I couldn't just slot back into my role the way that we had both hoped. And she listened and she supported me. She checked the organisational policy and processes on workplace adjustments that could be put in place. She followed the exact process, gave me options around prioritising tasks that felt like I could do in that state. And we made decisions together around what I could drop and, reducing my hours and sort of looking at how I could change my work to fit where I was at. We established a plan with check-ins and, ways I could get the support I needed to move through into recovery. And what I know now was that the reason this felt like a non-decision was because my manager had spent the last 5 years building psychological safety with me. She had consistently shown up for me, respected me, held space for me to ask questions. She gave me feedback when I didn't meet her expectations and constructively helped me to grow in my professional and my personal life. So I had this inherent trust with her, and it was a simple choice that didn't even feel like one. However, in another reality where maybe there wasn't that psychological safety, this could have looked very different. Maybe I would have just quit my job, just gone, I can't go back to work, I can't talk about it, and then quit my job and not had support to recover. Imagine then the ongoing financial distress I would have experienced. I wouldn't have had that sense of purpose or goals or something to really get out of bed for each day. I wouldn't have had connection with my peers. That was one option. Or maybe I wouldn't have admitted anything and just kept going. I can do this. I'll just keep going at full capacity, and then ended up causing significant injury to myself, maybe ending up on workers' compensation claim, meaning my mental health was now worse and the organisation, and team took a financial and productivity hit. So everyone was better off because my manager had treated me with respect and built that psychological safety in our team and between us. This is just one sort of additional slide because for much of this involves managing or having sometimes difficult or courageous conversations. Handling difficult conversations is really one of the most powerful ways to build psychological safety. It's hard to have difficult conversations. That's why they're called difficult conversations. But having them is really important. It's your role as a leader and, your duty to sit in your own integrity as a peer as well. It shows people that honesty and care can coexist. A difficult conversation doesn't become easier by avoiding it. Instead, avoidance creates uncertainty, resentment, and guesswork. And when leaders approach tough topics with clarity, respect, curiosity, it signals to the team that challenges are not threats, but they're opportunities to learn and recalibrate together. Psychological safety doesn't mean keeping everything comfortable all the time. It means creating that environment where discomfort can be navigated respectfully without fear. So when you're addressing an issue, these are some key sort of principles to keep in mind. Prepare with intention. Prepare your mindset. What is the goal here? What are your best hopes for this interaction? The goal is usually growth related, not blame related. Focus on the behaviour, not the person. Stay curious and open. Acknowledge the impact without attacking the individual if it is something that maybe they've done that hasn't worked out so well. And close with clear expectations and support as well as follow-up. Again, the key here is about balancing that candour and care. Go into difficult conversations with a clear intention to understand, to problem solve, not to blame. Using, I statements to reduce defensiveness and ask open questions that invite perspectives. So as we wrap up, I just want to say, remember, psychological safety isn't built in one big moment. It's built through repeated, consistent, small actions that show people that they matter, that they're heard, that they're respected, that they're seen. And the time when you need that psychological safety, when the wheels do fall off, you want it to exist because bit by bit over time, you've built that safety in your team. So you might start with one shift this week, maybe inviting input, before making a decision, or checking in with someone who's been a bit quieter lately. small steps to build that big culture change is important. So that's all from me in terms of the official slides. So I'm not sure if there's any questions that have popped into the chat.
There's no questions that have popped up yet, Steph, but thank you so much. This has been really enjoyable. Please, if anyone does have any questions, pop them into the chat and we can pick Steph's brain while we've got her. I was just thinking, what do you do if you are in a workplace and there are a few, say, dominant voices that are constantly perhaps overpowering or drowning out the voices of others, and you can see that could be impacting on the safety?
Yeah. It's really hard, and I think it depends on a few things. It depends on who those voices belong to. Are those voices your peers? Are they the other managers? Are they more senior than you? You know, a person's comfort and level of feeling empowered to speak up and be assertive not obviously, but it can depend on where they sit within an organisation. You know, let's say it's peer based. So there's a manager, and then there's a team, and there's a couple of members of the team who might be, you know, I guess, causing friction and making psychological safety drop. And it feels like it's because of these couple of people. It depends on what you're comfortable with. I'm a big believer in coming back to your own integrity and sitting in your own truth. Now, that sounds very woo-woo and a bit cheesy maybe to some, but I do believe in really thinking about, well, I can't control other people. We can never control other people, but I can control myself, and I can speak to the people that I might have trust with and make some positive assumptions and focus on who can I talk to address this. So if it is a peer or a couple of peers who might be causing this kind of, you know, lack of psychological safety, having an honest conversation with your manager about that and how it's impacting you, but coming from it in a way that is about problem solving and figuring out a way forward so that you have a strong, cohesive team. So again, thinking about what your best hopes are, as opposed to going, I hate this person, they're really annoying and I wish they would go away, which you might be thinking, but it's like, well, I can't make them go away. So how can I work with what I've got and, you know, believe that with the right communication, we can all get to a better place. Most people, not all, but most people do think that they make positive assumptions, do want to have a good experience in the workplace. So again, if we can all just take that positive look at things, and if you try that and you don't get met with, you know, positivity, you don't get met, you know, in the way that in which your communication is intended, and you don't feel like there's any other avenues, you know, it can be really hard. But hoping that the leader can have your back and assuming they do until proven otherwise is a great way to work it. Knowing that you've done everything you can and to honour your own integrity can be really powerful.
Thank you. That was a really lovely response. Thank you very much. I can see a few people are just dropping off and maybe heading off to the next meeting. I just wanted to call out, I've just popped in a link for our feedback. So for our survey, if anyone would like to grab that before they jump out and complete that. We do still have another couple of minutes, so we can continue going through some questions. So again, pop any questions that you do have in the chat. I've got a really good question here, Steph, that's come through. Any tips for fostering a safe workspace, but also maintaining a professional distance? My team can get a little too sidetracked occasionally with casual conversation. It's always a fine line, isn't it?
For sure. And look, not everybody wants to be mates with the work. I mean, I'm not saying this person, but they're two distinct things, right? I think that you can absolutely build psychological safety and have really strong boundaries. They're not, they overlap, I suppose, because sometimes psychological safety, when it's really strong, and then you end up forming really strong connections and even friendships with people in the team, and then, you know, that's where that sort of blurry boundaries might occur. But look, if you're a leader and you can see that your team has pretty good psychological safety, but maybe you're frustrated that there's lots of chit chat and not as much work going on, I think it's about having conversations, noticing exactly what part of it bothers you and why, and, you know, really again making positive assumptions and thinking, okay, well, if you know, you can't control everything. You can't make the environment absolutely perfect. If the biggest frustration is that people get a bit distracted with casual conversation, but they're otherwise performing and work is getting done. I would just, as a leader, just walk away from it and just sort of not contribute and keep your own, I guess, boundary in place. If you really think it's affecting productivity and performance and that people are not doing the job to the extent that they should, having one-on-one conversations, leading with curiosity, giving feedback on exactly the performance issue. So not even talking about the casual conversations that you think are distracting, but actually talking about the output that isn't happening. Because I think they're sort of two different things. If some people might just get frustrated and annoyed by the casual conversation, that's sort of on you, that you can just sort of walk away from it. If it is causing an output issue, address the output issue.
Thank you so much. I've had a few people tell me that my link is incorrect in the survey, so I'm currently scrambling to try and find the new one. So give me 2 seconds.
That's okay, you do that. That's okay, you do that, because I can see.
Okay, which is lovely. So
all good. I'll go through these questions if you want to just
I'll
fix
still
that
read
up,
them
that's
to you.
fine.
That's all right, and then I'll keep trying to fix it because there are a few really good ones here. How do I explain that I find that my culture is not understood in my workplace, and what can be normal in my culture is weird in Australian culture?
Oh, that's a good question and a big one. And I guess I don't have lived experience of that, so take what I advise with a grain of salt. I guess if you have somebody in your workplace who you do feel like you could speak to about that, I'd start with them. And again, I think it's about what would that look like? So, okay, you don't feel like it's understood. You that's obviously bothering you. Try to picture a situation or a time when it is understood. So 6 months from now, you don't feel this way anymore. People understand your culture. What have they done differently? How has that played out? What kind of behaviours have they asked more questions about you? Have they, been more curious? Have they been more, I guess, I'm not sure what that would look like for you. So I think it's really about thinking about what you expect and then having that conversation courageously with somebody in your team. It might be a peer at first, or if it's a leader, whoever it is, but hey, I'm feeling like I'm not understood because of A, B, and C. So again, being really specific about what has made you feel not understood, so people can understand what you're like, and really bring it to life. And then saying it would help me if people started to do A, B, and C to help me feel included and understood. So it's about being specific. It's about making positive assumptions. If you feel like people don't understand you, if again, most people mean well, doesn't mean that it's okay. So what is happening that makes you feel this way, and addressing that exact behavior. Curiosity.
Curiosity is so important too, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I've just added in a new link, so hopefully that one works. Just another question here. To what extent do psychologically safe workplaces depend on hiring people who genuinely fit the organisation's value and culture?
I struggle with that a little bit because a workplace cultural fit feels like a little bit of a fraught sentence sometimes, because it can kind of play out that the hiring manager can end up hiring people that they like or that they warm to in an interview, as opposed to someone who's going to be good for the workplace, has the skills for the role, etc., etc. Now, yes, values are important. We talk about values a lot at Superfriend. And I think when you onboard someone or recruit someone rather, you need to be clear about what the values are in this workplace. We value agility, we value respect, we blah, blah, blah. And so making that really clear from the start and prioritizing that in your recruitment, absolutely. In terms of cultural fit, I think it's an interesting one that's a little bit fraught, because you can have a room, a team of people who are all completely different, but have in terms of cultural background or what they do on the weekend or what their sense of humor is like, or how their working style. Some people like to work in the detail, some people are big picture thinkers. That is a great situation to have, all diverse types of people. but with the underlying similar values, I think that's really, really important. And so explicitly talking about the organizational values in your job ads, in your when you're hiring someone, when you're interviewing someone, asking them, how does this value make you feel? Would you prioritize it? This is what we do in our workplace to bring this value to life. Like if teamwork is one of your values, or if fun is one of your values, because for some people fun is not something that they value all that much. So they don't want to work in a workplace where there's a lot of silliness and fun, whereas for other people, they really need that relief during their day. So yes to values being sort of underpinning that psychological safety, but I'd be cautious of cultural fit language because diversity is really important.
That was a really lovely response. Having that diverse environment and diverse workplace, you just get so many different inputs and ideas, and it really is just about understanding and supporting each other.
Exactly.
There aren't any other questions in the chat. Did you want me to ask a few curly questions, or shall we wrap up?
Why don't you throw me one more question because we've got the time, and then we can wrap up.
I would love that.
Not too curly.
I won't do too curly, but I was just thinking about earlier when you said how important it is, just even those the good mornings, and how if somebody doesn't have that good morning to you, how that can kind of make you think, something's not right here. How do we create a psychologically safe workplace on video calls, particularly when people are less likely to speak up?
Look, I laugh because I am a completely remote worker at Superfriend, and so I feel that question, it's not always as easy. It requires a lot more cognitive load to interpret nonverbal cues when you're online, especially if everybody else is in a room and then you're left kind of interpreting, is everything okay? What was that? Look for that. Da, 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 da. So it can be a little bit more difficult. It just can be, especially if it isn't balanced. So if everyone's online, it's sort of different. But if some people are in the room and some people are online, it can be a bit tricky. My advice on that is to have a really open communication about what you do and what your expectations are. So what I always recommend, and I talk about this a lot in my advisory work, is creating a team charter. Okay, we're a team that is hybrid, sitting down and understanding what are our agreed upon norms. Are we all going to get together once a week in the office? Whenever we have a hybrid meeting, let's make sure that we do it this way. Let's all be on, it's really important for us to have 5-minute gap in between meetings, because when you are online a lot, I really need that break in between meetings, so really having that kind of agreed upon norms. We're going to say good morning to each other before we request things if we're talking via Teams, rather than just saying, Steph, where's the blah blah? It's like, hi, how are you? Because a little bit of small talk, polite culture does help people feel respected. Some people, not all people. So agreeing on that explicitly and writing it down and having a really clear conversation as a team, and then all saying, hey, this is how we're going to hold ourselves to account from now on. This is our code of conduct as a team that we've all decided upon together, means that it's really explicit and it's not left for interpretation for people. So when someone doesn't say, good morning, Steph, how was your weekend? And they do just jump straight into where's the report or whatever, I can say, oi, don't forget to be nice to me, because, or whatever it might be, right? So having that agreed upon set of norms for your team and how you conduct, how you show up and how you behave and how you speak to each other in an explicit document can be really helpful.
Thank you. I do have a couple of other questions that have popped in.
Yep.
There's one just again relating to the remote workplace. Do you have any further tips relating to effective remote working and establishing rapport with team members online?
Yeah, again, it depends on the nature of the split and how that hybrid looks. So if it is that everybody's really remote and can't ever come into an office versus, working from home 2 days a week, etc. So it depends. But I think what's worked for me on a personal level is when members of my team will randomly give me a call and say, I was just thinking of you. It must be really annoying for you to be the only person not in the office this week. How are you? And I'm like, oh, I feel thought of. We all just want to be thought of. We all just want to feel valued, right? That's really what it comes down to. And so the occasional phone call, now again, that doesn't work for everyone. So having that explicit conversation up front of, do you like phone calls or not? can be helpful. You know, reaching out to people, having virtual kind of social get-togethers. I know it's a bit cringe and a little bit COVID, you know, era, but if you are a completely remote team, once a month having trivia online or any of those sorts of opportunities for connection, creating a plan, you know, what is our strategy to keep people connected in a virtual or hybrid environment? And, you know, there's lots of tools out there. We have actually got, if you, I think I've stopped sharing my screen, but we have a report on hybrid work and what you can do to increase connection on our research library page. So there are lots of things you can do, but really talking to your team about what they want. Ask people. They usually know what they want.
Absolutely. And it's that really meaningful connection that's so important. We're doing those things, making sure that there's the meaning behind it. We've probably got time for one last question. So there's one that's popped up here, which, Steph, this is a really personal question, I think, but again, so incredibly important. And I do thank you for sharing your story earlier, because I think, again, just talking about those things are so important to, again, create the conversation and help lift other people that might be experiencing similar struggles. So the question that we had here was, what helped you get out of postnatal anxiety outside of the workplace? And I know you've got an amazing, very extensive background in mental health, and we might have some resources that perhaps we can touch base on, and maybe we could tie in some things to our email. But if there's anything that you wanted to share there.
I want to acknowledge, first of all, that my experience, like you said, I've got a background in social work. I've been working in mental health for 20 odd years, both in service delivery and in workplace mental health. And I have, you know, I'm a white woman living in a metro city. I have so much privilege and access in my situation, and I still was in a really bad way. So, you know, mental health is no joke, and certainly postnatal anxiety was no joke for me. What worked for me was saying it out loud to the people around me who could offer me support. So there was the practical support that, you know, letting my husband do some of the night wakings with my child, going to the doctor and getting some medication. Medication really helped me at that time. You know, and so my personal situation is obviously not going to be for everyone, but that really helped me to just clear the fog, get some sleep. You know, when you're in that real cycle of anxiety where you're really unwell, you can't learn to swim while you're drowning. And so taking the medication helped me to just take the edge off so I could get some sleep, start to have an appetite again, start to eat a bit more, share the load of the parenting with my partner, making adjustments in the workplace so that I could rest, get some sunshine. You know, it's sort of all the usual things, and also just being really gentle on myself, but also feeling the bad things when they came up as well. But certainly talking to a professional was the only way that I could get through it. I was not going to recover without getting help. Like there was no way I could do that on my own.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. It's always one of those powerful metaphors. You can't learn to swim when you're drowning, right?
Yeah.
You have to get help from that moment, and then go from there.
Yeah. So then you can put all the stuff in place once you can see clearly. And when you're in a funk of anxiety, you can't see clearly. So you need to lift that fog and then do the work.
Absolutely. That fog is very real, very scary. So thank you so much for sharing today. So thank you for sharing your expertise, your practical strategies, and your personal stories. So I do encourage all of you to reflect on what resonated with you most today. Consider one action that you can take to foster psychological safety within your team or daily work. And if you have any further questions or would like any additional resources, don't hesitate to reach out. We are going to send out an email to everybody with, again, the recording for today's session, and make sure that we've got a really nice working survey for you to complete. So that link will be definitely working in that email that goes out. So thank you all very much for your participation and your commitment to making our workplace safer. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Bye.